Good morning, dear friends. I hope this finds you well and having a great weekend. I hope also that you enjoy this message as much as I have enjoyed putting it together. The title for this message is The Cricket in Your Shoe. Now, there is a subtitle to this message, and it is Clothing Makes the Man or the Woman. Let me give you an example. If I was to ask how many of you saw the movie Pretty Woman, I bet probably 85 or 90% of you would raise your hand. If I was to ask you to name one outfit that Julia Roberts wore in Pretty Woman, I would be willing to bet you that 85 to 90%, maybe even more than that, would say the brown and white polka dot dress that she wore to the polo match. It's become an iconic outfit. It's been known and seen around the world. And if you see pictures from Pretty Woman, you almost always see a picture of her in that outfit. Well, I bet you wonder where that phrase came from. If I was to ask you, where do you think clothing makes the man phrase came from? Probably you'd say someone like Calvin Klein or maybe Ralph Lauren or some other fashion designer in the last 50 years. Well, actually it came from Mark Twain. Mark Twain was the first to say the phrase, clothing makes the man. But actually, he stole it himself because William Shakespeare, and I'm sure that Mark Twain read plenty of Shakespeare, William Shakespeare said, apparel oft proclaims the man. So I think that's about the same statement, only it's said by Shakespeare and probably stolen by Mark Twain. But I want to give you another person that I think is the author of that phrase. The real author, the very first author of that phrase, I believe is the Apostle Paul, and he was writing as he was led by the Holy Spirit. So I give God the authorship of this one, and it comes from Colossians chapter 3, verse 12. Listen as I read that passage. Since God chose you to be holy people that he loves, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Want to have the most pleasurable, fulfilling life you can possibly have? Sure. Take a shopping trip to God's clothing store. Now, for years and years on Sunday morning, almost 20 some years, I would be in a dark suit with a starched white shirt, white pinpoint Oxford shirt, wearing a Countess Mara tie. That was my outfit for over 20 years in pastoral ministry on a Sunday morning, except for when I was on vacation. After I left the last church where I was senior pastor, I was on staff a couple of places part-time while Robin and I were developing our business. And in those churches, the dress for Sunday and even when I preached was a nice pair of blue jeans and a polo shirt. Not a polo golf shirt type, but just a long sleeve, like a Ralph Lauren shirt or a long sleeve dress shirt, much like this one here. Then when it was time to start Prodigal Church, I got to do what I really wanted to do. I love a sport coat. And as you can see, for the very first time on these messages, I'm wearing a sport coat. Did it just for today's message. Won't be doing it again anytime soon until we get back in our worship building together, which is coming, by the way. And I'll give you some information on that in the next couple of weeks once things are more final. But in those days, I would think about wearing a sport coat. I love wearing a sport coat. Now, you all, and like me, you have some favorite clothing stores. For me, I usually get my weekday clothes, my weekly clothes, the stuff I wear during the week, which is usually gym shorts and stuff like that. I usually get that at Ross or TJ Maxx or Marshall, something like that. But I have a couple of favorite clothing stores where I get dressier clothes. One of them's going out of business, I'm told. It's called Stein Mart. And Stein Mart had some great deals on sport coats. I bought a couple of sport coats there last January when we were starting the church that I got for song. Just thrilled with the price. But my absolute favorite store, if you haven't been there and you live anywhere nearby, you got to get by this store. It's Dillard's Outlet Store in the old Oak Hollow Mall. It's the only building that's still occupied in there. And it's a great store. You will find some incredible buys. This coat right here I bought last December, getting ready for Prodigal Church. This coat retailed for $495. It's a Hart Schaffner Marks. I love Hart Marks clothes. Wonderful, wonderful sport coat. I bought it for, it was on sale in Dillard's clothing outlet store. It was $174 and it was 40% off. So I didn't even pay $100 for this. And I absolutely love this sport coat. So that's a fun place for you to think about shopping if you like to shop and get bargains. But even though I love this coat, it's not going to do a thing for my being the man that God wants me to be. My putting on the garments that he describes in Colossians chapter 3. That's where real good looks comes from. People who have those garments on, they're the best looking, best dressed people in the world. Let's take a minute and look together at 5 garments hanging on God's store rack. And I would encourage you to think about how you might try to do what the verse says. Put these on. Let me read this verse one more time. Since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. That's the New Living Translation. The first, tender-hearted mercy. It really means compassion. It means sympathy, concern, benevolence. Let me give you a fleshed out example of how that would kind of work and see if you can make an application of your own. Robin and I love to go to a deli for lunch every now and then. We have a deli in Greensboro we absolutely love, Lock, Stock, and Bagel. And we found a deli down here run by a guy. It's called New York Deli, and it's Kaminsky's New York Deli. The guy's name was Kaminsky. And he had started it, he came down from New York and had all these New York pictures in there, and he was a big New York Jets fan and New York Yankees fan and all that kind of stuff. And he had a great deli. And a while back he sold it. And he sold it to an international family, a husband and wife, and they had a couple of small kids. And they were using all the exact same recipes, the exact same names of the sandwiches, the exact same recipe for the potato salad and the pasta salad, and they had the same exact beverages. I don't know if that was part of the deal or not, but it's exactly like it was when Kaminsky had it. But these people don't look at all like Kaminsky. And the pandemic hit, and so we would go there because it was a real safe place to eat. We felt very comfortable. It's only really frequented by the locals, and the locals are taking good precautions when they go in there and all that kind of stuff. We were in there recently, and my wife is great with tender-hearted mercy, with compassion. And I'd gone up and paid for our meal, and they have a little tip jar up there, and I just paid for the meal on my card, on my debit card, and I didn't put a tip on there. I'm thinking, that he owns the store. Why would I put a tip on there? So we sit down at the table, and she says to me, "Did you give him a tip?" And I said, "No." She said, "I'm gonna go put something in there." And I think she put a $5 bill in there. It was a fourth of our whole cost, or more than a fourth of our whole cost of our meal. She did that because she understands compassion. She understands being tenderhearted. This guy's business is way down. His rent's the same. His amount he's having to pay Kaminsky's still the same. His cost of goods is still the same. His prices haven't gone up, and his number of people coming in, his clients, his merchants, is not nearly as much. And she felt for him in that. And we went back there again one day last week, and we hadn't been in a while, and it was my turn, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to give him a nice tip because he's struggling like so many of us during the pandemic. That's showing compassion. Who can you be compassionate to today? Maybe the people in front of you in the line at the drive-thru. Maybe you could do what some people have done and just say, "Hey, I want to get that person's up front. You take that one out of mine. Tell them theirs is paid for." I wouldn't do that if it was a van full of people, by the way. But you know what I'm talking about. There are good opportunities to show compassion. Want to be dressed well? Want to be the best dressed person out there? If clothing makes the man or woman, then I would encourage you, put on some of God's clothing. One of those is tender-hearted mercy, compassion. The second one is kindness. It's thoughtfulness, consideration, helpfulness. There's a great book out that kind of inspired me to go with this message today. It's one of two. This one right here. It's called Everybody Always, and it's written by a guy. He's an attorney, and he's hysterical in the way he writes. He wrote another book called Love Does, and it was on the New York Times best-selling list. He gave all the proceeds to an organization that he's involved with, and he's the consul for the country of Uganda, a very poor country, and he's been very actively involved in supporting them and some other causes. But he did something really crazy. In my opinion, he put his phone number in the book, in Love Does, and he also put it in this one, his cell number. It's in the back where he's the little testimonial by the author. And he puts a thing there and says, call me. And he has a policy that he will not, if at all possible, allow a phone call to go to voicemail. If somebody calls him, even though he's a very busy lawyer, if somebody calls him, he will stop and say, I need to catch this. I'll be right back with you. And he'll stop and grab the phone. Recently, he tells of in the book, he got a call. And when he got to it, it was a recording. And he hung up, and he thought it was some recording where these people are, calling to say something, and press 1 or whatever, and you'll get a person on the line who'll help you with your purchase. And so he just sloughed it off, went back to his client. Phone rang again, right back after that. He grabbed it this time, and it said, if you press 5, you will speak to an inmate in Sacramento prison, and it will be a $9.95 charge to your account. He thought, well, hey, this guy may need to talk. Somebody in the prison got Love Does, and they're passing it around, and he got my number. So he answers the phone, and the voice on the other end says, can I speak to Shanice? And he says, hey, man, I'm sorry, but Shanice sitting in here. There is no Shanice here. And he said, okay, and he hung up. Phone rang right back. He picked it up again and paid the $9.95 once again. And the guy said, hey, is Shanice in? And he said, you got the wrong number. He said, what number are you trying to reach? It was one digit off from his number. He said, look, I'll do something here. He said, now I'm going to be on the line because it's going to be a conference call, but let me see if I can reach Shanice for you. So he presses the buttons and calls, and Shanice's number rings, and this guy answers the phone, and he says, hey, can I speak to Shanice? And the voice on the other end said, she's with me now, and he hung up. And Bob Goff looked at him and said, is there something I can do? He said, I'm really sorry for you, man. I'm sorry to hear that. And he was trying to reach his girl, and his girl, he'd been in prison for almost 5 years, and his girl had found another guy. And so he said, yeah, would you call my mom? And so he called the guy's mom, and he said, hey, Mom, I need some help. And she hung up on him. Well, this broke Bob Goff's heart because he was filled with kindness. He's a kind person. And he's so kind, he wrote a book called Love Does, and he's trying to really live that stuff out. And so he wrote another book called Everybody Always, about loving everybody always. That's what Jesus was about. So he says to this guy, he said, what do you need, man? He said, I need a bracelet. He said, you need a bracelet, man? You're in prison. What do you need? He said, no, man, I need an ankle bracelet. He said, I'm coming up for parole, and if I could get the money together to get an ankle bracelet, I can get out on parole. And he said, well, how much is one of those? He said, I don't know. You have to talk to the warden. So he talks to the warden, and he finds out an ankle bracelet is very expensive. But he says, okay, I want this guy to get out. I want to be his friend. And so he bought this guy an ankle bracelet. Had never heard from him since. Guy got out. He knows that. He called back and found out the guy got out of prison. He's out on parole with an ankle bracelet. But he wanted to be kind. He wanted to express kindness to someone. Anybody in your life that needs an ankle bracelet? Probably not. Anybody in your life that needs a friend? Probably so. Bob Goff calls this guy his friend. And he acted as a friend. The third garment that Jesus tells us to put on through the words of Paul is humility. Now, never pray for humility. Let me just give you, there's two things not to ever pray for. This is the first one. Never pray for humility. When I was finishing up my seminary degree and I was going to be ordained, I was already a pastor of a church, but they'd done something special to allow me to start pastoring this church a little early. And I was supposed to preach an ordination sermon. Everybody who's being ordained has to preach an ordination sermon. And these ordination sermons are the low light, not the highlight, of every one of our denominational meetings. And we'd have a denominational meeting once every quarter, and part of it was the guys who were looking to be ordained would have to preach their sermon. So we'd have to sit and listen to 4 or 5 different sermons. And being the not too humble guy that I am, and having been in ministry now for almost a year before I got my ordination as a full-time pastor, I knew that I had a good sermon. And I had worked with one of my professors, and we worked on it, and this was going to be a real home run. And being the non-humble guy I am, I was excited about my sermon. So I got up to preach my ordination sermon. And right in the middle of it, I felt something in my shoe moving around. Now, we had a problem in our home in Columbia, South Carolina, during the spring, which is when this was, with crickets. Big crickets, not little crickets, big crickets, had gotten into our house somehow. And we were finding them in the closets at night. When you try to go to sleep, a cricket would start chirping and you'd have to try to find that thing or you'd never get to sleep. And so I felt this thing moving in my shoe. And I thought, what in the world is going on here? So right in the middle of my ordination sermon, on the floor of our presbytery, with all these pastors and all these professors from the seminary and all standing there looking at me, I had to reach down and take off my shoe and shake it. And into my hand is this huge cricket. And it jumped out of my hand. And I just paused for a minute and looked out and said, for my next trick, and everybody laughed. And everybody thought, wow, this guy's, he's pretty savvy. Well, if you want to pray for humility, you may end up with a cricket in your shoe. I was very humbled that day, and I've tried to remember that experience and tried to cling to that experience to remind myself that God can humble me anytime He wants to. If you pray for humility, some things may happen to you, like a cricket in your shoe. Do you want to wear the garment called humility? Let me give you 3 little pointers. Never tell people that you are humble. Let them tell you. In a Barney Fife episode of Andy Griffith, he thinks he's won this big award, which he didn't win. And he said, I'm all choked up with humility, and it's in humbleness that I want to humbly say before you. And Andy says, I think you got too many humbles in there. Never tell people you're humble. Let them tell you. Secondly, never try to act humble. Your pants will rip. You'll drip food on your shirt, or there'll be a cricket in your shoe. Never try to act humble. The third one is become humble. Mentally and emotionally treat others better than yourself. That's the source of real humility. That's the source of being a humble person. When you really and truly believe others are better than you. In God's eyes, you're all equal. Everybody's equal. But if you will treat people as though they are better than you, you will be truly a humble, godly person. You'll wear that garment and people will look at you and say, wow, that person's really nice looking. They've got it. They've got the looks. They've got the looks of being a person after God's own heart. The best look you could ever have. The fourth of these garments that Jesus gives us to put on is gentleness. The strongest men I know are some of the gentlest men I know. I have a friend that I fish with once in a blue moon. He's probably 6'7", 6'6", weighs about 295 pounds, nothing but muscle. His hands are twice the size of my hands. And he is one of the humblest people you've ever met. He took myself one time and my stepdaughter and her boyfriend at the time fishing, and he was doing everything he could to help us catch a fish. Couldn't care less if he caught a thing. He took me out in a little boat of his one time a couple years back, and we went red drum fishing. And he put the best rod, rigged the best way in my hands. And he didn't even fish until I had a fish on. And he was just a guy who understood gentleness. He wanted to make somebody else have a better day than him. The strongest men I know are some of the gentlest. If you want to put on a garment that makes you look really good, put on gentleness from God's perspective. Demonstrate that you are concerned with the needs of the other person more than your own. Make it your true heart for others. You will definitely be the best dressed person in the room if you put on that kind of gentleness. Now, I'm going to give you a little acronym. JOY. Jesus, others, you. When I am going off to work in the mornings, I always love to leave my wife a little love note. And just to say, and I hope you slept well, and I hope you have a great day, and I'll be missing you. And I always put a little in the corner, JOY. And every time I do that, I feel like the biggest hypocrite in the world. I struggle to make Jesus, others, and me the priorities in the order like that. Jesus, others, you. I tend to have me, Jesus, and then others. There's no acronym for that one. I want to live out JOY. I want to have that joy. I want to be about Jesus first, then others, then myself. Want to put on the garment of gentleness? Learn that acronym and make it your life. Jesus, others, and you. Now, the fifth of the garments that God's given us to put on through the words of Paul is patience. Never pray for patience. Bob Goff tells a story in this book. It's a neat story. He read a children's book, and in that children's book, it was about buckets, and it said, take a bucket and put into that bucket the things that you want to shape who you are. Well, he liked that concept, so he went out and bought himself a bucket, and he carried it around for several weeks. And people would look at him and say, "What's going on?" He got on an airplane. He says, "You got a bladder?" This guy says, "You got a bladder problem?" He said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I do, but my big issue is my bucket here is about patience. I'm trying to learn patience. I'm not a patient person. I'm always in a hurry." And he said, "I'm trying to learn patience." So he carried this bucket around. And he would, when he went to speak at different occasions, he'd take his bucket. When he went out sailing on a sailboat, he took his boat. When he went out to dinner, he'd sit his bucket in the seat beside him. And people would say, "What's the bucket for?" He'd say, "I'm trying to load this bucket up with patience, because that's what I need in my life. I need patience." Well, I think that's a great concept. So Bob Goff was asked to speak at a guy's church. The guy's name is Randy, golly, I'm forgetting it now, and I'm sorry that I am, because he's Randy Phillips, Craig and Dean. He's part of the group Phillips, Craig and Dean, and he pastors a church. And Randy Phillips asked him to speak in his church. So he went and he spoke at this church, and he was telling all about different things, and he told about his bucket. He had his bucket with him. Well, he got through speaking, and he had to speak in the morning and twice in the evening, and he was just going to have enough time to return his rental car and get on a flight to get back home to be with his wife. And that's what he was so looking forward to. And he goes to the rental car place, and there's two lines, and he chooses the line on the right. And the line on the left started moving and kept moving and kept moving, and the line on the right just sat there and just sat there. And the more it sat there, the more he got upset. The more he thought, "I'm not going to make my flight." And then he realized, "I've already missed my flight." And then he started getting madder and madder. And he started thinking about this guy who's dealing with these people in this line shouldn't be in this job. He should have a different job, because he's made us all so slow. We've missed our flights. And he was just getting more and more upset. And he looked over, and there was his bucket. And he thought, well, I need to work on this. I need to give this up to the Lord. I need to say, Lord, you've got this. This is your timing, not mine. And I'm going to be patient. I'm going to be patient. So he gets up to the guy, and the guy checks him out and says, I hope you had a great time, and did your rental car work out well for you? And the guy was talking and telling him all this stuff that really didn't need to be told, but the guy was really nice. And so he went and parked the car, and he started to walk across the lot to go get set up for his next flight, which was going to be a flight that took the place of the one he'd missed. And the guy comes running up, and he said, he said, Mr. Goff, I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciated your message this morning. God has a way of getting our attention sometimes, doesn't he? He was going to give that guy the what for, and that guy was one of the ones who listened to him talk that very morning in that church about patience. God can use anything to get our attention sometimes. He wants us to be clothed in the garments that make us look good for Him, for His glory. Couple of thoughts about patience. Remember, God knows what you need to get done. He hadn't missed that part of your day. He knows what you need to get done. God has all the time in the world. His timetable is infinite. It's totally infinite. God is more concerned about who you are than what you accomplish. He's way more concerned about who you are as a person than what you get done in a certain amount of the hours of a 24-hour day. Have patience. Let me reiterate these just one time real quickly. There are 5 garments of righteousness that we can put on that allow us to look the best we can possibly look because we are God's people. Tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Want to have the most pleasurable, fulfilling life you can possibly have? Take a shopping trip to God's clothing store. The best dressed to walk out of the store is clothed in tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I lack so many of these garments. I go out wearing the ugliest things you could ever wear. Anger, frustration, lack of patience, lack of kindness, lack of tender-hearted mercy. I so often don't look like you want me to look and don't clothe myself in the garments of righteousness that you tell me to clothe myself in. Lord, I pray that you would help me and everyone who has heard this message today to pick some of these and make them a part of the apparel that we put on for our lives today and tomorrow and from here on, that we would make sure that we've got on those garments that make us look like you would have us look. In Jesus' holy name, amen.